During whole group sharing, students share new learning and make their thinking visible to each other. Each student clarifies their thinking and builds on the ideas of others. As they reconstruct how they solve the problem, students learn to articulate their thinking. Knowing how words work is a transferable skill that will serve students throughout their school life and beyond.
If you notice anything, what did this group do? This group did it as well over here, to change happy to the opposite, which is unhappy. Agreeable to disagreeable. Attentive to inattentive. Just think in your heads for a moment. Now quickly talk with a shoulder partner, making sure everyone's included.
Like this. Yeah, that's really like a prefix in the beginning of the word, so then it just adds on to the main word.
If Diva, Sharani, and Kajal's group could share their conversation, because I sort of listened in, and I like what I heard. Can you tell the class what you noticed about these words? If somebody's comfortable speaking. Okay, Diva, go ahead.
Like, for the negative words, sometimes they have prefixes like un or dis, and they're mostly opposites.
And they're mostly opposites, so by putting the prefix on. And how did you decide which prefixes to put on? Because look at this group, had unattentive, then they crossed it out and put inattentive. What if I said dishappy? So we know that dis and un means the opposite. Dishappy, does that sound right? No. So I'm wondering what you were thinking in your heads before you decided which prefix to put on. Talk with your people again. How did you decide?
Yeah, because like maybe people can't like read it. So you have to make sure it makes sense so people can read it.
So let's hear some sharing then. What were you thinking? Ayub?
Thinking that it had to make sense before you write down what you were going to put, even that they both mean like if it's negative, but you have to make sure it makes sense before you write it down.
Thank you, that's great thinking. So Ayub said a lot of them can make a word negative, but you have to think, does that make sense before writing it down?
If children have interest, then education happens.
We're here today speaking about multimedia learning theory developed by Richard Mayer. Essentially, Mr. Mayer believes that multimedia works best when it addresses both the visual and verbal processing systems, but he is concerned that written and spoken words can overwhelm the visual cognitive process. Once things are processed by sensory memory, words and images are selected and proceed to working memory. Here, the words and images are later organized into verbal and pictorial models, and then integrated with prior knowledge from long-term memory to form lasting learning. That's a brief summary of multimedia learning theory.
I think you'll realize that for every country on earth, you could draw little circles to say these are places where good teachers won't go. On top of that, those are the places from where trouble comes. So we have an ironic problem. Good teachers don't want to go to just those places where they're needed the most.
ESL student is a student who's learning English as a second language. So that might be a student who is from another country who moves to the United States and they're learning English as a second language.
This is the first experiment that we did. 8-year-old boy on your right, teaching his student, a 6-year-old girl, and he was teaching her how to browse. This boy here in the middle of central India, this is in a Rajasthan village where the children recorded their own music and then played it back to each other, and in the process they enjoyed themselves thoroughly. They did all of this in 4 hours after seeing the computer for the first time. In another South Indian village, these boys here had assembled a video camera and were trying to take the photograph of a bumblebee. They had downloaded it from Disney.com or one of these websites 14 days after putting the computer in their village. So at the end of it, we concluded that groups of children can learn to use computers and the internet on their own, irrespective of who or where they were. Children will learn to do what they want to learn to do. Where I gave a group of children, they spoke English with a very strong Telugu accent. I gave them a computer with a speech-to-text interface, which you now get free with Windows, and asked them to speak into it. So when they spoke into it, the computer typed out gibberish. So they said, oh, it doesn't understand anything of what we are saying. So I said, yeah, I'll leave it here for 2 months. Make yourself understood to the computer. So the children said, how do we do that? And I said, well, I don't know, actually. And and I left. 2 months later, and this is now documented in the Information Technology for International Development Journal, their accents had changed and were remarkably close to the neutral British accent in which I had trained the speech-to-text synthesizer. In other words, they were all speaking like James Tooley.